Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our program today. Going to get us started here. Let me get my screen here to share with you. And there we go. Our program today is Murder and Mayhem, Crime in Early Pendleton County. And we have looked at crime in Pendleton County. There we go. I was beginning to wonder if that was going to come up. We are looking at crime in Pendleton County as seen in the newspapers in our area. By area, I mean Covington and Cincinnati as well. We're going to start with mayhem, and I've divided mayhem into two categories. It's shooting and stealing. So we'll get on with that. As I said, we're going to start with mayhem. We're going to begin with the shooting at Gum Lick. I want you to notice as we go through the papers that the wording, how sensational and how dramatic some of the phrases and the wording that they choose to use really was. This is Williamstown, Kentucky. Excuse me, that's the cat scratching on his new scratchy. This article probably originated in the Williamstown Courier. They covered a lot of news from that area. But this particular article I found in the Evening Bulletin in Maysville, Kentucky. It was dated the 19th of January, 1887. Keep in mind that Gum Lick Baptist Church is still an active congregation, and it's a very old congregation. It was started before the Civil War. They met at the old Roanoke School until they built their building. This community of Gum Lick is off Highway 22. It's about 8 miles or so from Williamstown, maybe around 10 to 12 from Falmouth. Keep in mind also that this area of Gum Lick was prone to violence in the late 1800s. I could probably do a program on violence in that area. It was that profound. So we'll look at it's called A Tragedy in a Church, and I'll read the article. News has just reached here of a terrible shooting affray at Gum Lick Church, 6 miles east of this place, in which Constable M.Z. Christ was shot by Robert Dance, one of a party of toughs who were making a general discharge of musketry, so to speak, and who is a terror to the community. For quite a number of years, the country surrounding Gum Lick has been the scene of numerous tragedies. Last night after church, the people were startled by a continuous shooting accompanied by yells of, "Come on, Christ." Christ, who is all grit, went with the prisoner when his brother Dance interrupted, and Christ attempted to arrest him also. When Dance drew his pistol with the words, "Arrest H-L, I'll shoot you," and attempted to fire in the officer's breast, when quite a struggle ensued with the above result. They were surrounded by the gang who prevented anyone from coming to Chris's assistance. A warrant was sworn immediately out for Dance's arrest, but he has not yet been found. I did not find anything in the papers that told us that he was found. I'm sure he was. This is the Gum Lick Church. It's not the most recent picture. It is, but it's a beautiful picture. This was taken by and colorized by Ronnie Wolf, and I want to acknowledge him and thank him for letting me use this. Today, the church has an additional addition over on the left side. In this picture, you just see it on the right side. At the time when this shooting occurred, there was no addition on the side, and the little vestibule in the front was not there. Not sure when the steeple, right off the top of my head, when the steeple was put on. It may or may not have been there. It did cover the history of the church a little bit in the tour that I took you on of Cowansville and Gum Lick and Orange Grove, Locust Grove area. And that is still available on YouTube if you want to go back and see some of the history of the church. We're going to move on now to our next bit of mayhem. I've entitled it Stevenson and Clark. This article appeared in the Cincinnati Daily Star on the 20th of April in 1875. I cut the headline off because it just didn't really fit. It messed up getting the article large enough to actually see it. It was called Burglarizing the KCRR. William Stevenson and James Clark, both of this city, and it's subtitled Covington, so these guys were from Covington, were about 10 o'clock last night detected by Mr. Thrasher, the agent of the Kentucky Central Railroad at DeMossville, in the act of burglarizing the ticket office and grocery kept by Mr. Thrasher in connection with the office. He and a friend whom he called on for help armed themselves with 2 double-barreled shotguns and awaited their return. After thoroughly searching the premises, the young men crept through the opening of the door where they had gained admittance, and attempted to escape. They were interrupted by Mr. Thrasher, who ordered them to halt. This they did not do. Thrasher then fired at them, the shot taking effect on Stevenson, bringing him to the ground. A shot was also fired at Clark, but with no effect. He was finally brought down by a stone. All the booty they obtained was about $80 worth of railroad tickets, which was found on their persons. Both parties are seriously wounded and are now lying at the station in critical condition. Stevenson is a son of Dr. Stevenson, one of the leading physicians of this city, who was very much horrified at hearing of the affair and started immediately for DeMossville. Clark is also a resident of this place and is well known and respectably connected. Parties arriving from DeMossville this morning report both the young men lying at the point of death and that their recovery is considered impossible. Much excitement is caused in this city by the announcement, as the young men are well known by everybody here and belong to the first families of the place. The wording is, the description of the boys sneaking in, and you can almost visualize it, like you're almost as if you're there. So that's kind of typical of that day. I did a little research here trying to find out who these guys were and if they died, because oftentimes the papers are so sensational, there's no way this person can live. He's at death's door, and those kinds of statements come out, and you'll find these people did live, and they lived long after the event sometimes. I have seen them as much as 20 years down the road still alive. So it wasn't, probably if it was bad, they came out of it, and it may not have been quite as bad as it was played out in the paper. But I went looking for the guys, and in 1870, Stevenson, I was able to find him. He was a 17-year-old. So at the time of the crime, he's about 22 years old. And he was living in his father's home in Kenton County. Clark, I really did not have any luck with. There were several James Clarks. I looked for someone who was probably in 1870 would have been somewhere between 14 and 20. And I found 3. So without knowing more about his parents, I really wasn't able to pin which one it could have been. I didn't find Stevenson in an 1880 census. However, doesn't really mean anything. Family could have relocated. He could have moved. He could have died. So I really don't know about that. Okay, and now we're going to get to murder. I've chosen to talk today about the murder of Martin Brand. This murder took place in the Knoxville area of the county. Martin Brand was from Covington. His murder was claimed to have been a hit. The men were hired to do it, and 2 were implicated in this. One of the men who was implicated in the killing claimed that his partner was the one that fired the fatal shot. He also claimed that he and his partner were to do the killing, and that indicates that they were hired to do that. Martin Brand lived at 174 West 5th Street in Covington. But why would anyone want him dead, you ask? I'm going to give you a little bit of background story here. The murder took place within about a mile of Pendleton County. There's the press, when the press reported this murder, there's a lot of things that just don't fit. And a lot of places and people's names get changed a whole lot in their reporting. So this first article that I found reported the shooting that occurred near Mossy Creek. Later on, that becomes Brassy Creek. You're going to find that Donnelly, who was one of the men accused of killing Martin Brand, his name varies in the press. He did have an alias. The alias surname is Williams, but the first name of Williams varies a lot. The other person involved in the killing as well, his first name changes a whole lot. The basics here that we're going to look at was that Brand was unable to get a clean title to some land here in Knoxville. And Donnelly was living on that land. The land had belonged to a widow by the last name of Tanner. And she too was living on that property. Brand had finally gotten an eviction notice, really, to be delivered to make these people be forcibly removed from the property. And that's what they were out there doing at the time of his murder. Donnelly was captured in Williamstown. The first article, this happened, well, I jumped gun there. I should go back. Let me go back. From the Cincinnati Enquirer, March the 31st is the first account we see. And in that article, they give two different accounts. So right off the bat, there are two different stories and they appear in the same article. The article, not the one we're looking at, but the first article of March 31st appeared in the Cincinnati Enquirer. And the headline says, "A Cruel Murder. Tragic End of a Kentucky Lawsuit. Martin Brand of Covington killed for attempting to obtain his rights. One of the most cold-blooded, dastardly, and deliberate murders has occurred for some time, took place yesterday morning within a mile of Knoxville, Pendleton County, Kentucky." So again, dramatic speech, right? Cold-blooded, dastardly, and deliberate. The murdered man was Martin Brand of Covington, and his murderer was a man named John Donald. Not Donnelly, it's showing up here as Donald. Alias Jim Williams. So Jim is the first surname we hear for Williams. Or the first name we hear for the surname Williams. The latter lived on a tract of 100 acres of ground, which Brand owned but could not obtain a clean title to until about 2 weeks ago. Yesterday morning, he started from Covington and met Deputy Sheriff Yelton at Butler, and the pair then started for the farm on Mossy Creek to dispose Donald and a widow named Tanner, who occupied it. Keep in mind, they mentioned Deputy Sheriff Yelton. This is another discrepancy we're going to see coming up. And I'm not sure which Yelton it was. There were several Yeltons who were sheriffs and deputy sheriffs throughout Pendleton County's early history. The sheriff had a wagon with which to remove the widow's household goods, and Brand rode on horseback. Yelton taking a back road, and Mr. Brand riding up the main road leading directly to the home of Mrs. Tanner. When he had reached a point directly opposite an old house used for storing hay, a gun was thrust from the crack in its side, and an instant later, a flash of flame leaped out of its muzzle, and Brand fell from his horse, a corpse. Another example of some dramatic language. the ball from the weapon having crushed through his brain. Two men working on a building about 500 yards from the scene of the murder saw Donald and a man with whom they could not recognize run out of the house and take down the road toward Williamson's. And this is, remember, Williams lived on this property, so here they're calling him Williams' son. As soon as the shot was fired, I should go back and say Williams' son, Donald, is that guy. Two men were working on a building about 500 yards from the scene of the murder, saw Donald and a man whom they could not recognize running out of the house and take down the road toward Williamson's as soon as the shot was fired. Mr. Brand was picked up in a few moments, and Deputy Sheriff Yelton mounted his horse and rode post-haste to Williamstown, which he reached about half an hour in advance of Donald. The latter was at once arrested, and upon examining him, a large Navy revolver was found in a holster attached to the belt, which was strapped around his waist army fashion. He denied killing Brand and said he did not know the name of the man who was seen with him. Mr. Yelton procured a conveyance and took his prisoner to Falmouth, where he was lodged in jail. Donald, or Williams, is an Irishman and has a family. The weapon with which Mr. Brand was murdered was an Enfield rifle and was left in the hayloft when Donald and his partner ran away. But there is another account of this terrible affair. The tale was told to the unsuspecting bereaved woman in the wholly untempered words of the following telegram received about 6 o'clock yesterday evening. Walton, March 30th, 1877. Mrs. Ella Brand, Covington, Kentucky. Your husband, Martin Brand, was killed this morning. Come to Knoxville at once. And J.H. Johns. This intelligence was startling indeed, and the utter absence of any particulars of the tragedy seemed only to add to public interest. Knoxville is a little town in Pendleton County, and Walton, 8 miles distant, is probably the nearest telegraph station. It was known in a general way that Brand had been successful in recently in protracted litigation over some land in Pendleton County, and that he went up there yesterday morning to take possession. The supposition is that the defeated party or one of his tenants had resorted to murder as his last means of defense. Then it goes on to say that Brand left here yesterday morning and met Sheriff Colvin. It just previously had reported Deputy Sheriff Yelton, so now it's Sheriff Colvin. There's going to be another change too. And it's quite possible that the sheriff and the deputy sheriff both met him, and maybe not. We don't know without the court case. But he met him at Butler on the Kentucky Central, whence the two proceeded armed with a writ of possession from the Pendleton Circuit Court. When within about 30 yards of the house on the disputed farm, a man leveled a shotgun at Brand, fired, and the load lodged in the doomed man's head, killing him instantly. He fell dead without a word, a groan, or a struggle. Some more dramatic language, right? Whether the sheriff arrested the murderer or not does not appear, but the presumption most charitable to him is that he did. This information was brought to Mrs. Brand by a messenger from Pendleton County last night, and Jerry Reed left at once in charge of an undertaker's wagon to bring the remains home. Brand has had a world of trouble about that piece of property, his adversaries contesting the suit bitterly and by all the many means known to the law. Once Leslie Williams, or Lewis Williams, so now Jim is also known as Leslie or Lewis, we're not sure, was supposed by Mrs. Brand's informant to have done the killing. Brand recovered the land, a 100-acre farm on Grassy Creek. So here we hear Grassy Creek now, a long time ago, but could not get the possession somehow. And last fall, an execution for the costs against his adversaries was leveled on that very land, and Williams bought it at an execution sale. This sale had to be set aside, and at last, about 2 weeks ago, the final writ of possession was awarded. A Mrs. Tanner was the adverse title holder, and the style of the case was Brand against Middleton and others. No idea who Middleton and others are, okay? The deceased was in our Covington office only 2 weeks ago tonight, mentioning his victory to Covington Reporter, and was congratulating himself on his hard-earned victory. He was about 65 or 66 years old, perhaps older. He leaves grown children and a fair estate. So now then we go to this article that appeared the next day in the paper. It's just a little snippet here. The body of Martin H. Brand was brought to the city yesterday evening in charge of Jerry Reed. And after undergoing an examination at Reed's undertaking establishment by Dr. Kearns, I'm tongue-tied today, was removed to the late home of the deceased. The fatal ball entered behind one ear and came out over the eye on the opposite side. Okay, keep that in mind because another report is going to dispute that finding, okay? Williams, the accused and arrested party, admits the killing, but says his partner did it. His story is that he, with his pistol, and his partner with his rifle were to do the killing. And this part, I think, is probably a typing mix-up somehow, because it doesn't really make sense. The rifle firing first, and it failing, pistol next. The rifle did the execution with terrible completeness. So either the rifle was fired after the pistol again, a second time for the rifle, the third shot, or the pistol was fired first and then the rifle. It's a little bit confusing there. And then the third day, we've had in a row, so we had an article on the 31st of March, the 1st and the 2nd of April. This one in 1877, April 2nd. And it appears in the Cincinnati Daily Star. We're going to notice we've got another name for Williams here in this one as well. The body of Martin Brand's death, a mystery surrounding the affair. The body of Martin Brand, who was murdered in Pendleton County, Kentucky last week, arrived in the city Saturday evening. Doctors Kearns, Noonan, and Hall made a post-mortem examination. They were unable to find the ball and came to the conclusion that Brand had not been shot. Now, previously, they've reported a bullet hole, right? It will be remembered that the coroner's jury of Pendleton County brought in a verdict that Brand came to his death by a rifle ball shot through the brain. However, the next paragraph, and it's got a tear in the paper, so you can't really read all of it, but it goes on to describe that the physicians found a ragged hole, and it gives the dimensions of it, 2 inches and something about a right ear and some other dimensions in there. And then a large piece of bone, which had been knocked out. It's kind of grisly there. And these old papers did not shy away from grisly. They liked it. And then it states a rifle ball would have made a clean hole. So again, so there's some contradiction right there within this. First of all, he's not been shot at all, and then we're describing a bullet wound. This postmortem was held 48 hours after death. Joe Williams, alias Donnelly, so we've got another name for Williams, Joe now, okay? He's been Jim, now he's Joe. He was Lewis or Leslie, So the first name, they're really just, nobody really knows, I think, is what it is. Or maybe he had many aliases, but stuck to the same last name. That's possible, I guess. Joe Williams, alias Donnelly, who was arrested in Williamstown for the murder, says he did not do the shooting, but that his partner did. And he goes on, to do the same thing, to clear himself and put the blame on his partner. And I like the last line. There is a mystery surrounding the affair which time alone may hereafter solve. Kind of dramatic language, to say the least, right? The only mention I can find, it's a preliminary trial. And this is really the only mention I can find, and you can tell that there's not much there. Both articles did appear in the Cincinnati Star. The one on the left was on the 5th, and the one on the right was the next day, April the 6th. It tells that the progress was very slow. And it says here, several witnesses will be recalled today for cross-examination. The attorneys will argue the case this afternoon. Probably no decision will be reached before next week. Then the next day, they post the preliminary examination of Donnelly and Norton at Falmouth for the murder of Martin Brand that has been in progress for several days, resulted yesterday in their being held over for their appearance before the next term of the criminal court. There were 47 witnesses examined, and the testimony is very strong against the accused parties. I just can't imagine where they got 47 witnesses. Yeah, I'm sure they talked to all the doctors and whoever the coroner's inquest, whoever conducted that, probably also testified. But as much as I can count up, I'm not getting to 47. This case would be an interesting one to find because it would name several of those anyway, if not all of them. On April the 7th, 1877, it reports Norton as Morton, M-O-R-T-O-N, instead of N-O-R-T-O-N. It really is Norton. He doesn't seem to use an alias like Williams or Donnelly does. The two men accused of murdering Martin Brand in Pendleton County have been bound over for their appearance at the next term of criminal court without bail. Okay, they're going to go back into court and try to get bail. The testimony produced at the trial fully exonerates Deputy Sheriff Mullen. Where did Deputy Sheriff Mullins come from? He is not mentioned. We start out with Deputy Sheriff Yelton, and then we mentioned Sheriff Colvin, and now we have Sheriff Mullen, which is Mullins. He may have been involved. This may not have anything to do with Deputy Sheriff Yelton. My first thought was that maybe they mean Yelton, and because remember, Yelton took the wagon and went to a back road and left Brand to continue on the road they were on, and Brand was shot shortly after that departure there. So at first, that's what I thought they meant, but it's possible that another deputy sheriff was involved. I don't think they went there expecting that kind of trouble, but maybe they did. Nothing says that they did in the newspapers. And then it says, Williams and Morton will be obliged to lay in jail for 4 months. Circuit Court in Pendleton County met 3 or 4 times a year from the beginning up and for many years, from the beginning of court in the county and going on for many decades, really. Here is where they decide to try to get bond and get out until this 4 months, rather than sit there for 4 months. I'm sure you've heard of a writ of habeas corpus, or some of you have. You may not remember what it is, so I looked it up in Webster's and got you a good definition here. It's defined as a writ requiring a person under arrest to be brought before a judge or into court especially to secure the person's release unless lawful grounds are shown for their detention. Webster went on to explain a few other things about it, but this is really what applies in this case. Both of these articles are dated on the 14th of April, 1877. The one on the left was in the Cincinnati Enquirer, the one on the right in the Cincinnati Star. The interesting thing about the article on the left are the players. It introduces you to who's trying this case, who's listening to, who's defending, who's prosecuting, who the judge is. So it's kind of interesting to find the players out in this. John Norton and Leslie Williams were before the judge, Perkins, on a writ of habeas corpus yesterday at Falmouth to be admitted to bail. Williams and Norton were tried before the police judge of Falmouth a little over a week ago, charged with the murder of Martin Brand. The trial resulted in their being held over to the Pendleton County Criminal Court on the charge of murder, bail being denied them. The ground for the habeas corpus was that the evidence at the examining trial did not warrant the judge in his decision. Judge Perkins, after hearing the testimony and arguments for and against the prisoners, remanded them to jail to await the action of the grand jury. Norton was represented by Charles Duncan of this city, which would have been Cincinnati, or well, actually, I think this was in the Covington section of those papers. So he was in Covington. And W.W. Ireland of Falmouth. Williams by John H. Fryer, who was from Pendleton County, and H.T. Buckley. The Commonwealth, so this is the prosecution, was by Judge Cleary, and he was from Covington. That's why I think this is the Covington section. And J.T. Simon of Falmouth. The Cincinnati Star reported that George G. Perkins and the district attorney W.W. Cleary visited Pendleton County to try a writ of habeas corpus sued out by Williams and Donnelly and W.L. Norton on Williams alias Donnelly and W.L. Norton on application for bail. They are the parties charged with the murder of Martin Brand of this city. After hearing the case, the judge remanded the prisoners to jail, refusing them bail. So they did not get bail. This is a date you're going to want to kind of keep in your mind, the 18th of May, 1877. This is reported in the Cincinnati Daily Star. A murderer's escape. Leroy Norton, who had been confined in the Falmouth jail in Pendleton County on the charge of murdering Martin Brand some 2 months since, made his escape last night. About 2 weeks since, his cell door was found to have been filed off its hinges, and he was placed in another cell. A strict watch has been kept on him ever since, but it seems the jailer did not scrutinize his visitors very closely, as he could not have made his escape without the aid of tools. The jailer took the usual morning food into the jail this morning, and when he came to Norton's cell, he discovered the door open and his bird flown. And a skeleton wire key was sticking in the lock. After getting out of his cell, he took the iron grating out of the window, which gave him free access to the jail yard. The escape of this man has caused considerable excitement in the little village, and the citizens are scouring the country for him. So some sensational kind of press. His bird has flown. I do want to point out here that the Falmouth jail was, I almost want to say, notorious. It was not uncommon for people to escape from that jail in the late 1800s. This jail would have been the one behind the old courthouse on Main Street, the one that was torn down, that you just see the basketball goal there now. That would have been where the location of the jail at that time. Okay, the last paper was May 18th. This one is June the 1st. Cincinnati Daily Star we now have a reward of $300 offered for the arrest of Lee Norton. So keep in mind, on June 1st, they offer a $300 reward. 1877, this was, $300 was pretty good money in 1877. We're looking at, post Civil War. It was pretty much an economic depression here in the South, and Kentucky as well at that time. So $300 was good money. Now we go to February the 21st, 1878. The Cincinnati Daily Star again. Martin Brand's murderer sentenced. In the criminal court of Falmouth, Kentucky, the case of John Donnelly, tried for the murder of Martin Brand, was concluded. The jury rendering a verdict last night of guilty of manslaughter and fixing the punishment at 4 years confinement in the penitentiary. Brand was a citizen of Covington, and it goes on to kind of just give a little synopsis of what happened. And the last sentence is what I want to really draw your attention to. It starts right here. Donnelly had an accomplice named Norton who broke jail and is still at liberty. So we are looking at Norton has not been found, and it's nearly 9 months in the ballpark of since he broke out, and there's a $300 reward for him that nobody's turning him in to get. We also, so that's, I think this is kind of amazing. Whatever happened to Lee Norton, I don't know. I think he probably was not in Pendleton County. Donnelly got, according to this, 4 years in the penitentiary. Keep in mind, the penitentiary would have been the state penitentiary. He was not left in county jail. He got 4 years, and it was probably hard labor, because when you went to the state penitentiary for something, that's usually what you got. And by hard labor, that would have been things like breaking rocks with a pick or an axe, building roads, replacing railroad ties, or even helping to build railroads, that kind of activity. So very physical kind of work. That sentence, I've looked at several murder cases in the county, and I've seen murderers who walked right into a bar and shot somebody just in front of everybody, get 2 years. This guy gets 4 years. I've seen 20 years of hard labor be assigned to people. So it's kind of, and in the 20-year incident, that one was kind of, he probably had somebody helping him. They never really proved it. And it occurred in a bar. There were a lot of things in there that made you think maybe the case wasn't, that the guy who wound up being convicted was really a scapegoat. So, there was just really no rhyme or reason to the sentencing in cases back then. So in closing, I want to point out that criminal behavior really hasn't all that much. People still shoot other people, and they still get shot by them. There are still murders for hire. Greed still plays a role in the behavior. As I've already pointed out, the sentences for similar crimes was quite varied back then. It's probably much more similar crimes for similar, probably much more, what do I want to say? It's not, probably not as varied, I guess is what I'm trying to say. However, the sentences may have changed. Some may be stiffer and others not. We don't have hard labor anymore. The media is still sensational, maybe not in the same way it was in the late 1800s, but still sensational. Although it is rare that we have a murder in Pendleton County, we have had them, and we've had quite a few in my lifetime. So, and I'm sure you all can remember some of those as well. Petty crime robberies, that kind of thing has always gone on, and we still have that problem to today. So Pendleton County has never been immune from serious crimes or petty crimes, and we probably will never be, right? Thank you all for joining me today, and we will be back in February for another program. Murder and Mayhem is a program that I plan to do some more cases for you. So do plan to stay tuned to that, and I do plan to go back and find some court cases and compare the media reports to the court cases and some of my programming. So if you know of an old murder, I don't want anything new, or an era in which you want to look at crime, just send me a message, and we'll see if I can't use what you have and go from there to create a program. I'm open to that anytime. Thank you very much, and you have a great day. Bye-bye.